Well, hi there. Well, guess where we are today again. I have my special guest Gary Gals here again, and I think we're going to talk today a little bit about pruning trees, the secrets around pruning tree. I think it's an interesting subject because you never know, will I hurt the tree or will I not hurt the tree? So we have our special guest here today, Gary Gals, and he will enlighten us about pruning trees. And as you can hear, we're serenaded by the frogs too, so that adds a little bit. I think spring is around the corner. What do you think?
Yeah, the frogs are a definite indication here today that we're just about ready for some good weather. And that shot of warm was great this week.
And a little bit of rain helped.
Yeah.
So everything is
good. The tree's nice and clean here for us, and after it had gotten rained on last night. But yeah, fruit tree, and in particular, we'll talk first about fruit tree pruning, and that's always an important topic because people, the first thing they say is, I don't know if I'm going to hurt this thing or not when I'm doing this. And, it's although a pruning cut is a wound, it's actually, if you just follow a few simple steps, you can, determine for yourself what needs to be done for a tree.
Okay.
And first we'll talk about those things just briefly here. And then we'll actually do some hands-on work with one of these trees here, or maybe a couple of them to show you what types of things you can do for fruit trees.
What is a good time? I mean, I never know, is fall a good time or spring? What do you recommend, Gary?
Yeah, this is actually a really good time to prune apple trees or cherry trees, things like that. And, right now it's just about the time when the sap's going to start rising and they're going to start, budding out and blooming and stuff. But this is the time to get them right before that occurs so that there's no wasted energy going into those branches that you're cutting off.
Right.
And if you're going to start into a spray program or some kind of disease and insect prevention program, you want that material out of there, so it doesn't, it just costs you less to do those kinds of things.
Right.
And, this time of year is, it's easy to see what needs to be cut. Once the leaves are on there, very difficult to figure out how to cut things. And, once the leaves are on, then everything that likes to eat those leaves, insects and disease and all things, they're also, gearing up to do that kind of thing. So you want to prevent as many wounds as possible once the plants have started budding and blooming and growing those leaves. So this is a very good time of year. You can do it late in the fall after it's, the sap's gone down. Yeah. That would be more along, December, January, February.
In Iowa, it'd be hard because with all the nasty, you don't want to be out in your yard or in your orchard and cutting. I think this is a good time of year, and I think we're all ready to do something, don't you think?
Yeah.
All our fingers are itching to be out there and do something.
Everybody's calling up and saying, isn't this the time to do this? Yeah, it is. So
good.
And that's a good general rule. I mean, I'm sure I'll mention a couple of places where there's some things you can do at other times, but that's generally the rule you want to use, is get them before they start budding out. And, and like I said, it's easy to see what you need or want to cut when there's no leaves on there.
Yeah.
So.
And you mentioned before, especially with fruit-bearing trees, it's important to keep down the branches, the growth, so actually the tree will bear fruit.
Yeah, there's the definite advantages to doing the pruning that we're going to do on this tree today. For instance, in this particular tree, if we were to leave this, there would be way more fruit on there than what the tree can support.
Oh,
so you might have some broken branches.
Yeah.
And then because there's too many fruit on there, then each individual fruit is less likely to be its full size, or it's more susceptible. It's a little weaker. So we're going to take off some of that material there, and then the individual apples that are left will be bigger, and they'll be depending on what kind of year you have, and if you have a drought or something, those apples will be better apples.
Yeah.
There's all the resources of the tree are focused on.
Gary, and something I have noticed in the last few years, we don't have very many bees. I don't know if you have problems here, but I live in town, and I'm seeing that the population of bees are going down.
Yeah, that's true. There's been a disease in the bee population, so then you get that factor of when the plants are blooming and it's time for that pollination to occur, they're not around. You know, so that's a problem here as
Is
well.
it really?
There was
Yeah.
one year that we had an extremely off year in
Yeah.
terms of production. They just didn't get pollinated.
Yeah.
And that's going to be a problem here. And Iowa State keeps track of that stuff, and
Yeah.
you know, it's still a problem. It's,
Is it
you know,
really?
I hear they're on the rebound,
Okay.
but you know, it's still going to be a problem this year. And then we've got the fact that it was warm in February. It was
Yeah.
very warm, so
Yeah.
that means that they're going to be blooming earlier. And if it's chilly or wet during that time when they're blooming earlier, then
Yeah.
there's less insect
Right,
activity.
because they're still dormant.
So, you know,
yeah.
these factors all just snowball into, you know,
Yeah.
all these things come together, and then that decides what kind of production you're going to have, even probably as much as what we're going to do in terms of this pruning.
Right, right.
But we'll do some pruning on this tree for those factors, and also, you know, so that basically so that we can maintain a healthier tree. One of the important parts about pruning is that opening up the tree, you get some air and light movement in the center of it as well as the outside, which keeps the diseases down and doesn't allow those insects to get into the place.
Right.
And if you do use either organic or pesticides, something like that, then you can get penetration into that plant, you know, when you're putting that in. That's very important in an orchard. You know, they're
Yes.
going down the rows with these big, you know, fan-generated spraying units, and they need that chemical to get into that,
Right.
you know, the center of that tree.
Right.
These are organic. This is one of the few truly organic orchards around the state for
Yes.
commercial production.
Yeah.
If you could call us a commercial producer, we're really not that commercial, but
Yeah.
you know, we're listed in the state, you know, the registry, but
Yeah.
these are non-pesticide apple-producing trees here,
Good to know.
and most of them are Liberty. That's a very disease-resistant variety.
Mhm.
That's
Good
you know,
apple for
available.
Iowa.
Yeah, and so I guess what we can do is I'd like to just mention a couple of things about what I'm going to be doing to the
Sure.
tree, and then I'll talk
Sure.
as we're actually doing
Yeah.
some pruning.
Yeah.
There's a simple rule of thumb that you can use whenever you're going out to prune a fruit tree that you're going to have in your yard, and that is, you know, the really basic ideas are that you want to take care of the branches that are going to be a problem for one reason or another.
Uh-huh.
And one of those problems can be that it's rubbing against another branch.
Uh-huh.
You know, so there's going to be a wound
Yeah.
there.
Yeah.
Another problem would be that the tree has produced what's called a water sprout, where there's a branch that just goes straight up.
Yeah.
And those are very
Oh.
weak wooded, and they also are going to end up not having good fruit on them. So
Yes.
you want to take those off.
Yeah.
And then there are branches that are, for one reason or another, that are going in a direction that is going to cause you to have problems with the fruit. You know, they might be going straight up, or they might be going straight down.
Yeah.
Or they might be, you know, moving in towards the center of the tree rather than away from it. So those are the things I'll go through whenever I'm pruning a tree. I'll make 3 or 4 passes around the tree, just starting with the branches that are
Good.
very easy to identify that this isn't going to work. I got to get rid of this branch.
Yeah.
And then from there, and then you get a little,
Yeah.
you know, you get a second look at it after you've opened it up a little bit. So.
Good. Good.
And
Tell
I
us-
chose this tree because of the, it's easy to see some of these things
Yeah.
in here.
Tell us a little bit about the tools you're going to use, Gary.
Oh yeah, I've got 3 tools that I'm going to use today. Maybe only 2 of them, but
Yeah.
possibly 3.
Okay.
This is just a pair of loppers. These will cut the larger branches that are, and that cuts pretty close to the trunk. It's just a straight scissors action
Mhm.
here. And this is a pruning saw. This has got a curved blade on it here, which is important if you're trying to sneak inside the tree and get something that's close to another branch. Very sharp. You want to take good care of these. The teeth go right to the end here.
Good.
And then there's my main weapon here. This is a pair of just hand clippers. These
Yeah.
are Felco number 2s. But this is mainly what I use when I'm pruning a tree.
Okay.
About probably 80% of the cuts I make will be with this, and then the other 20% these 2. If the tree has, you know, been managed
Right.
somewhat.
Yeah.
If
Good.
I get to a yard and you know it's never been pruned, then we get this guy.
This guy, or the chainsaw, right?
Yeah. If you got to use a chainsaw on an apple tree, you're in trouble. You're definitely in trouble.
Well, I think, Gary, what I'm going to do is, after a little break, I'm going to give you the microphone and everything, and I'm going to stay out of your way, if you like, and then while you're working, you just can talk, and I'll be out of your way. How about if we do that? Okay? Good. When we come back, then you start pruning.
Okay, so this is an apple tree, and we're going to start pruning this tree here. And the first thing I'm going to go through is I'm going to go through and just pick out some branches that I can identify just right off the bat that I want to get rid of, and to open up this tree a little bit. So I'm going to go in and I'm going to take out some low branches and take out some of these middle branches. I'll try and describe what I'm doing as I go along here. If you just take a look at this tree, it has a pretty good shape to it. This tree's been worked on over a period of time, and it's the central leader on this tree has been removed initially, you know, right when it was growing. The reason for that is so we can get more room right in the center of the tree. And that was a definite decision on our part to have an open, you know, tree. Because we have so few trees here, and you know, we just have a small operation, it's very easy for us to take care of them if we use that method of pruning. So this has got an open habit to it. And I'm going to go in and I'm going to take out some of these things now that are, you know, for instance, rubbing against each other. You know, here's a branch right here. You can see it has grown and it's been rubbing against this other branch. These are going to be touching no matter what we do. There's no way that we can actually, you know, not have these touching each other. So these kinds of things need to go. So we're going to go in here and we're going to cut them almost directly on the side of the trunk. And one of the things about this you'll notice when I'm pruning is that as I go along here, I'm going to be using a technique which is called drop pruning, which is you take off the whole branch back to the next branch. You know, when you cut something, you don't cut it part of the way down or half the way down. You cut the whole thing off. That's most of the cuts I'm going to be making are going to be like that. That takes off the most material and it cleans up the tree the quickest way. So all these things that we can identify in here that are kind of causing problems, we're going to take these out. This is I mentioned before that sometimes there are branches that are going straight up or straight down. Those don't have good production for us, so here's a straight up one. We're going to take that off. Here's another example. See, this was broken off during, you know, ice or wind or something. We're definitely going to take those off. Anything that we see that's been wounded, we're going to remove that, because that's going to, if an apple were to happen to come on something like that, it's going to break it further anyhow. You know, and there's going to be a wound or a weakness there that the tree is, you know, is going to cause a problem with its health. So. Oh, and the other thing I wanted to mention was, I said I'm almost going to cut back to the trunk. There's a thing called a branch collar, which looks like my fingers, right at the base of every one of these branches. And that branch collar, if that stays on, then the tree heals more quickly. So, you know, rather than just flush cut and just smooth it so it's right off with that other last, I'm just going to leave a little spot. There's just going to be this very tiny little stub sticking out there so that this branch heals much more quickly. Okay, so this particular tree is branched too low, so we're going to go in here, we're going to take off some of these guys. Now see, now here's another broken one. We're going to take this off as we go. I'm going to go in and I'm going to take off some of these low branches so we can raise the head of this a little bit. To do that, I'm just going to cut my way into the center. This is a very frequent technique when you're out pruning in somebody's yard, is that you just have to cut your way in to get going. Oh. Now you're probably thinking, well, yeah, it's easy for him to say, you know, he's been doing this for 28 years, but you know, the fact of the matter is that if I make a mistake and I cut one branch that, you know, I didn't want to cut, well, gee, you know, I mean, it's okay. You know, you can't always get everything right the first time. So, but all these guys that are in here, these are just they're way too low now that the tree's older to have the proper amount of light, and they're susceptible to some passing rabbit or something too. So we're going to take some of this stuff out here, especially in the center of the tree. These are just going to go so we can get this cleaned up. And once we get a few of these out of here, we'll be able to start to see what kind of scaffold we do want on this. Let's see, well, that's still low. We'll take this off too. This is a tree that was not pruned last year. In our management around here, we only prune on alternate years. You know, the reason for that is that we have sort of the, well, they call it integrated pest management approach. It's actually the low-key approach to taking care of an apple tree. If you can prune them every year, and there are systems set up to do that, but you know, we also like the way these trees look out here just as a whole. And so part of our management is, well, we're going to just only prune them on alternate years. We'll get a little more fruit that way, and they won't be quite as big, but that isn't the only consideration for us. So that's one of those things you think about when you're actually looking at the overall picture of it. Okay, so I'm going to continue to take some low branches off here. Especially if you're a homeowner, you're going to want to have these off so that you can, you know, do your regular maintenance. If you're mowing and things around, you're going to want to have this so that you can get in here. Okay, now that's cleaned up considerably just on the base here. So that gives you, already you can see where you could get more light and air in there and stuff. So now I'll come back and I'll stand back and I'll take a look at this and take a look at what's going on at the upper levels here. Now this tree is just a little bit busy. You know, you don't need these many branches, and there's a couple of things here that you can identify right away that need to have something done with them. For instance, there's one branch that I don't like the looks of too much here, and that's this big guy right here. This is heading back towards the center of the tree, number one, which is somewhat of a problem. But as you can see, it's touching 3 or 4 other main branches on its way across there. So, you know, if I'm going to open up the center of this tree a little bit, I need to be taking off some things like that. So we'll go in and we'll take this one off. Now if you have, you know, until you get comfortable with using a saw like this, sometimes it's a good idea to cut the branch and then cut it again. That way you don't tear the bark. If you can avoid tearing the bark on any of these cuts, then you're way ahead of the game here, because those kinds of wounds don't heal very quickly. So we'll take off a piece of this and then we'll finish it off. Okay. Now see, that's better already. Whoop, let me get this down so you can see this. Now we've got a little more light going through there. Here's another example of a crossing branch. I'm going to go ahead and take off some more of these in the center so you can get an idea of what this should look like when you get done with this kind of pruning. At some point in the past, all these little branchlets and stuff have produced fruit, you know, and they've done a good job of that, no doubt, because you still have the tree. But at some point there you reach this place where it's time to get rid of these things, because the extra leaves and stuff in here are just going to raise your possibility of disease problems. Now remember, I'm taking these off, and as I'm taking them off, I'm leaving a little bit of stub there. I'm not completely taking off the right flush back with the trunk, but leaving a little stub. So we definitely have that healing process going on as quickly as possible. This isn't going to be as easy to see if I don't get out of here, so you can see what this center looks like here. Now, does it look like it's a little bit cleaner in there? We've got some more room to work with. I'm actually not quite done. I can see there's a couple more I'm going to take out here. This one right here. These branches that I'm cutting right now, these are just headed back in towards the center. That's probably their only fault. They might have had some good apples on them this year, but when they're coming back into the center like that, they're going to cause me some problems. So we'll take some off. Put the energy towards the outside, more the outside of the tree, so it'll probably be easier to pick too, which is always a good thing. Okay, now as I move out on the branches here, I'm going to be more particular about which ones I'm removing, you know, as I'm getting out towards away from the center of the tree. So now here's a good example of what you're always going to run up against. You've got a series of branches here from two different trunks, and they're touching each other. You know, it's this is what I mean by being busy in here. You know, there's way too much going on here. You could have as many as a dozen apples in this, you know, 2 square foot area there, which is not good. So so I'm going to have to make decisions about how I'm going to prune this in order to produce, you know, the long-term benefit here. So anything that's sticking straight up and down like this, of course, well, you know, we don't need something like that. So, you know, if it's going up or it's going back towards it, or, you know, it's obvious. Another good example is see how this branch right here comes down, crosses over this, crosses under this one. Those kinds of branches are going to end up rubbing in any kind of a wind. So those are the kinds of things you need to be thinking about taking out. And also another thing that comes into play here is the branch angle itself. You know, you can have 2 branches that are growing together like this, or you can have 2 that are growing like this. You know, if you've got this strong crotch angle on those branches, then you're going to be more likely to keep that branch and take off the one that doesn't have that strong angle. You know, so when I'm looking at this right here, I'm thinking, okay, you know, we've got some competition here. Well, this is stronger than this, so this has got to go. And then this is going up. We don't need these. This is rubbing on that one. Here's another up. So every time I'm making a cut here, I'm using the same 3 things I started out talking about. Was, you know, is it rubbing? You know, is it got a bad angle? Is it, you know, is it a water sprout? You know, these kinds of things that I'm looking at here as I'm cutting this. It doesn't have to be any harder than that. It's just, I'll take this one out. I'll take this one out because of those 3 simple rules. So I'm just going to go through here and I'm just going to take out the things that go up and down and or have a strange angle to them. And okay, so at this point, what we see here now, hopefully you can see this with the camera, this is a much more open situation. You know, just by taking out the branches that went up and down or crossing, now I've got some air through here. See, I can run my hand through here and I'm not touching branches. Now there's still a couple touching there and stuff, but basically, you know, this is pretty much set up to go now. I still don't like that one, but see, you've got some room here and some of this material's gone now. This is a, same situation up here now. This is something that I described earlier. You see how this has been broken. This has definitely been broken from some kind of, storm damage or something, so that goes. And then you see, we've got another situation here where we've got a branch that comes off and another branch that comes off. Now, if you look at the crotch angles of those, both of them are fine. You look at how the branch is growing, they've got some up and down things, but they're basically fine. So how do you decide which one of these to take off? Well, that's up to you. It's just whatever your decision is about that, given the factors that are involved. Now, in my case here, I'm going to take this smaller one off. This larger branch has more potential fruit, and it's in a stronger situation. So this is the one that's going to come off so that they don't rub anymore. So see, that opens it up a lot. Take off your ones that are going straight up here. And so you've got an open situation here again. Now you're going to say, well, now, I can go on doing this forever. Well, that's true. You could go on doing it forever, but you want to try and stop after you've taken off somewhere around 25% of the tree's bulk. Just sheer bulk, 25%. Stop and reassess what you're doing, because it may be that that's just a good time to quit. You may have some branches that are, these are only 3 inches apart right here, but that's okay. You don't have to try and accomplish everything in 1 year. You could do just that 25% this year and then clean up some more next year. So that's an important point, is that I usually try and stop at 25%, and then I decide if I'm going to keep going or not based on what the people want from their tree and what kind of production and stuff we're going to get. So I'll just go ahead and continue cutting a few more of these they're touching each other and stuff, and we'll see if we can clean this up just a little bit more. Again, I'm going in, and these branches that have a large diameter to them, I'm cleaning off all these little side branches, which are just going to take away from the overall health. These little guys aren't going to produce much for us. And like I said, and down low here, these are important to get these off of here. As you get up higher into the tree, they're not so important. They could be producing fruit, in the future when they're up on that outer edge more. This one's coming back at me, so this will go. But I think you can see just from these simple techniques that, it's easy for you to get out there and just do a little pruning on this. Take a few branches off, get rid of the problems. You'll increase your fruit production, and it'll be easier to take care of the tree in terms of insects and diseases also. So thanks. Next time maybe we'll move on to some other kinds of plants.
What?
Well, Gary, we had another show, or we invited you before, pruning trees, and it was so interesting and so educational. I thought I could come back again, and you could show us a little bit more, and this time maybe shrubs. That's another problem, especially when you have blooming shrubs.
Yeah, yeah.
When do I cut them? What shall I do? And with lilacs, lilacs are just prone to get out of hand, don't you think? If you don't take care of them.
Yeah.
So if you could help us again and enlighten us on how to prune shrubs, we would really appreciate it.
Yeah, we'll kind of wander around the yard here
Good,
today, and
good.
we'll take a look at some individual, types of plants, and then as we're pruning those particular plants, then I'll relate that to what kind of a class of plants that they're in,
Good.
and then any plant that's in that category can be pruned in the same way at the same time, and then you'll get the excellent results that you're looking for from that. So now the first thing we'll look at here is this is a lilac. This is a royalty lilac. It's one of the newer varieties that's out on the market there. This is essentially a non-suckering variety, although a lot of what we're talking about is going to be the same even if it's a suckering variety. But lilacs bloom in the spring.
Right.
And like all blooming spring type plants, the best time to prune them is right after they're done blooming. What you're doing there is you're taking off that old material, and you're giving the plant the best start for setting the flower buds for the next season. As you get later on in a season of a spring blooming plant, you're more likely to be cutting those future blooms off if you try to trim on it. So we're going to just do our main pruning on a lilac in that particular class of plants when right after they're done blooming.
So that would be what, July?
Yeah, well, yeah, depending on the variety, either
the
middle of
ones,
June to the beginning of July is when you're going to want to prune on those. And that goes true for like honeysuckle. Honeysuckle's another plant that is in that same category of doing that kind. There's a couple of things that you're always going to want to do to a lilac, and the first thing is that you'll take off the old flower heads. Right after those are done blooming, they'll be very easy to see. And this is actually pretty easy to see also. You can see these are just started to bud out for this year.
Right,
there's a
right
green
there.
bud right here.
Yeah.
Well, this is last year's flower bud here, so everything that's above that is going to come off.
Yeah.
And then you go around and you just check where that last green bud is, and then you can clip off these. And that the old lilac bloom has a real feathery branch to it.
Right.
You can crack this right off. So.
It's almost hollow, isn't it?
Yeah, and it's easy to see. So we'll go along and we'll take off these old flower heads. Everywhere we see one, we'll just go back. Okay, here's my good bud right here. So and they're also easy to identify because they come up through the center here. That's usually been an old flower head, so we'll take those off. And you can do that. You can just go through and you can take and remove all those old flower stalks like that. That will be the majority of the pruning that you're going to do on that plant, is just taking off these old flower buds.
Yeah.
Now, let's say it's it's the beginning of July, and you're taking a look at this. The other thing you can do is you can prune it for size. You can say, well, at this time next season, I would like for this plant to be the same size it is right now.
Right.
It's reached the size that I want it to be. It's looking good. So, you take a look at last year's growth on this plant, and you see that it grew somewhere between 8 and 12 inches on those. So I know that if I cut this down about a foot, that when next year at this time, it's going to be back up that foot again. So you can gauge on how much you want to cut off on that. So, in that instance, we'll just go, I want it to be this size next year. So you take and you come down here, you just clip all those off at various places. And, if you can do it using your drop pruning method, which we've discussed earlier, drop pruning is that you always take a branch back to another branch. If you're cutting off that flower head, you're just cutting directly off on a single branch. If you're drop pruning, you take and you go in and you cut back down to the next branch itself.
Right there.
So, and that would be the best way for us to actually drop this down that far. It keeps the plant clean, and it allows that air movement through it, which is important on any kind of a plant. And then occasionally there's going to be some things on a lilac or any other kind of shrub that you're going to want to remove at the base. Now it's easy for us to see. I don't know if the camera can see that or not, but there's that one branch that's coming straight up out of this.
Yes.
You'll notice, and if you've done any pruning, you'll notice this, where if there's a lot of branches coming off the base of a plant, a middle branch like that can get squeezed by other branches.
Yes.
And when that squeezing happens, it eventually kills that branch.
Yeah.
It'll just kill it. So we would go in and we would take out that sprout that's coming up there in the center, and some of those little branches that are right down the base, because if they get big, they're gonna rub against each other. Yeah. So we would come in here and we just take these off. This comes off. Yeah. This was our straight up branch that we had.
Just look at it straight up.
Just like an arrow.
Yep.
And then all these little guys that are headed around in here. This is not unlike some fruit tree pruning that we've done, where these branches that are headed back towards the center of the tree, we're coming out of this, that center trunk. We'll take these out and clean it up a little bit. And, it's not likely that you're going to get any blooms on these central branches in here either. There just isn't enough light in there to produce those flower type buds. And these are almost along far enough where you can see that. Now see, here's one that's going back in towards the center.
Right.
You can clean up, the plants like that, just depending on how you want the plant to look though. I would mainly prune it for removing the old flowers and then sizing the plant.
Right.
And then if you have a suckering variety also, you'll want to, maintain some of those suckers and get rid of some of them also. The old, like, common purple lilac types, they have those branches that come up right from the ground. You're going to save some of those because they're going to be future blooms.
Yes.
Because eventually a long-term project of trimming a lilac, you want to be able to take out those bigger branches after they're 10 or 20 years old and rejuvenate it that way. So. Yeah. And the only other thing you can see here where there's a couple that have grown together.
Yeah.
That's kind of an anomaly there.
Yeah.
If you're, a little fussy about stuff like that, you can take that off too. We can also stand right here and I can tell you about another type of plant that is in a different category of pruning. Now, lilacs, again, that's like a spring blooming shrub. Forsythia, honeysuckle, lilacs, all those kinds of plants like that bloom early. As soon as they get done blooming, that's the time to cut on them. Now this plant is in the Privet family.
Yes, a hedge.
This is golden privet.
Yes, and look at it, Gary. It's starting to sprout. That's a good sign. Yeah. I like to see that.
Gold privet is actually kind of a little bit different than the normal hedge plants around here. The normal hedge privet is just, it's a tough plant. Right. This generally kills back on us, down to the snow line.
Really?
But this year was incredibly warm and generous, and so this plant is actually already budding out very high. There's some buds that are clear up here, so it's going to be a nice show. The thing about privet, which is a hedge plant and it's a tough, durable thing, is you can prune that any time.
Right.
It does have a bloom, which is white, and it is fragrant and it's nice, but most people don't grow them for the flowers,
Yeah, right. So. And then also it develops those little black berries too.
Yeah.
And anti-poisonous. So when you have children in the yard, you don't want to have it blooming at all. I don't let my hedges bloom at all.
Yeah. Yeah, that is an important factor if you think they're going to get eaten.
They just look like blueberries. And it's kind of, don't want to have sick neighborhood children.
Golden privet is a plant that's in a class of, shrubs or subshrubs that benefit from pruning because of how they grow. In golden privet's case, the best color on this plant is on the branches that are going to grow this year. Mm-hmm. So if we go in and we mow this off, or we clip it in some way with just a regular pair of hedge shears, then that new growth that's on there is going to have the best color. So we'll go in here. Usually my wife does this because she likes to get out and just go after it. But you just go in and you just take your regular pair of hedge shears and you go around and you shape it, the shape that you want it and the size you want it. Now we allow this to grow up, so we'll come in here and we'll cut this down. You can see again, this grew. That's 16 inches last year. So we'll actually have it 16 inches lower than what we wanted at the end of the season.
Yeah.
And then it's going to grow up, and then that good color is going to be there. So, you know, plants that are in this category are like a Nico hydrangea
Right.
or something like that, where, you know, as soon as you see where that bud's out, then you can just clip off all that stuff above that. You pick a good fat bud, you clip it down, and then that new growth is what gives you the best flowers.
Yeah.
You know, so plants that are in that category, you know, you can't hurt them to come in this time of year and just
Yeah.
cut them off.
And it also looks better pruned, cut. Actually,
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, it's particularly in the case of those hydrangeas or these privet and stuff, you want them to be compact. You know, you want them to be, you know, tight and nice, and
Yeah.
so you'll get your best color from that. These even, look at this, we've got some green leaves on there from last year.
Yeah, it's
Kind of
amazing.
surprising.
Amazing.
But it was just a nice soft winter.
So,
So now we can go over and take a look at some other shrubs
Good.
around the other side here.
Good. oh, Gary, this is just one of my favorite evergreens. It really, this is just a beautiful, beautiful blue spruce.
Yeah,
I like
these
the size of it.
Yeah, this is these blue spruce are nice. You know, this color's hard to get from
Yes.
you know, other things. You know, this blue. But this is a good example of, you know, just a general conifer, and what you can do to prune these in case you need to shape or size those particular kinds of plants. Conifers have a growth habit in what they call candling. And if you ever heard the term candling before, it's where, you know, this new growth starts out in a stage that looks just like a little bud, like you see here right now, and then it'll elongate, look just like my finger. And when it gets to that stage where it's very nice and tight and long, they call that a candle. And that is the point where you want to prune that tree. You know, if you clip those candles, you know, to whatever extent you do it, then that's the best time. And when that busts out and actually produces these new needles, then it'll form the buds and stuff, and it'll continue to grow along, and it won't miss a beat. You know, to cut these now, then you're losing that ability. Anything that I was cut on this now would lose that ability to recandle. But you know, they see it. Let's say, for instance, you're going to take and you're going to, you know, cut back. You're going to keep this side tight so that it doesn't encroach onto your house or something.
Right.
Well, you take and, you know, when these elongate out here, then I clip it off. If I clip the whole thing off, then the branch essentially doesn't get any bigger. It stays just where it's
Just
at.
the size.
If I clip half of it, then you get, you know, maybe 4 inches of growth. You know, this is how much this grew last year, which is about 6 inches.
Yeah.
So you can decide how much it grows in there. And this is useful because, let's say, for instance, you know, the paper boy in your neighborhood threw, you know, the paper in there for a few days, and, you know, he broke a branch, or, you know, there was some storm damage, and you've got a place on the tree where there's a little bit of a hole. Well, you can encourage that tree to grow into those areas. You know, you can, if you clip these back and you don't clip this back,
And
this
then
is
it
going
will
to get
fill
fatter
out.
here.
Yeah.
So you can decide on how you want that tree to grow right in that area, and you can fill in and hide that hole. You know, and you might have to bend a branch or two. That's a different story. But you can actually, you know, decide that you're going to fill this in by doing that pruning.
But that would be then also long term, because it doesn't fill in
Right,
one year.
You know,
so
a
be
spruce
aware.
tree grows slowly. So, you know, you're talking about, you know, working with the plant.
Right.
Now, if you're like if you're with a white pine or something that can grow 18 inches a year, it's going to fill in quickly. But that actually, a white pine is in the same class as this plant. Any spruce you have, any pine tree that you have, Austrian pine, mugo pine, any of those kinds of plants, they all candle. And anything that candles, you know, you're going to want to cut it when it's on that candle stage. And that happens right in June. That's coming up here. It's going to be, you know, just at a certain point, all of a sudden, those are just going to elongate like crazy.
Yeah.
And so, you know, when you see people out clipping around, you know, on those candles with these, you know, they're doing their shape in the tree. And they're also sheared that way. When they're grown in a nursery situation, rode out, and they're grown to come to a nursery like ours, they just go along with giant, you know, electric or you know,
Interesting.
power-driven things, and they just shear them just
Yeah,
with, right on
same,
the
same,
candle.
same. Excuse me, same with growing Christmas trees.
Yeah,
Because
yeah.
you shape that. That's a good example. If you get
Yeah.
a perfect shaped Christmas tree, somebody was really working hard on it.
Yeah, yes, they do. They, you know, and it's generally the case in the nursery industry these days that everything is sheared.
Yeah.
It's very
Look.
difficult to get a plant like this. This is actually, I bought this as an unsheared spruce,
Yeah.
you know,
And you just.
but it was the architecture of this particular plant that I liked about it. So.
Yeah. It's just
But,
gorgeous.
if
Just
you don't
gorgeous.
cut it after a while, then a sheared one will become an unsheared one again. So.
Yeah. It goes
know.
back to the old. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's just gorgeous.
So again, any pine, any spruce, any fir that you have around in your yard is, when that candle stage hits, that's a good time to do it. And you know, this in particular, if you need to cut a branch that's been damaged for some reason or something, this is a plant that you always want to drop prune. You always want to go back to another branch. You know, it's a very bad idea to cut halfway on any of these. You know,
Just go right in there.
you can always see that stub. You'll always be able to see that sticking out. I like to, when I prune a tree like this, I like to cut it so that you can't see that you've done any pruning.
Yeah.
So now maybe we'll go over and take a look at some more deciduous plants.
Yes.
Okay, so our next specimen here is a burning bush.
Oh yes, this is a big one.
Yeah. This is there's different kinds of these. This is just the regular old standard burning bush. Call it burning bush because it gets very red or very, very pink in the fall. This is the time that its main color show is. So, you know, you have a little bit different tack with this than you would some other plants. Now, basically, a burning bush, being that the foliage is the main attraction, you can trim it just about any time. But there are better times than other times to prune it. And one of those times is right now. This is a good time to prune these because you can take a look at these individual branches and see where the new growth is and see where the parts are that have died. One of the things about a burning bush here is that you know, they for better or for worse have a lot of branches like this where they get about this long and they die back.
Yeah.
You know, that's partially due to, you know, there's these little insects that like to girdle the stems and, you know, and cause that. And this is a plant that's, you know, has close natives that have been around in Iowa forever.
Good native
so,
plant to
yeah,
plant.
Yeah.
It's a great plant to grow in Iowa.
And that
I
means
love
that
it.
the bugs are around here too. But, you know, in order to, you know, the best way to do this, if you have a plant that's like this that you want to be this size and shape and it's fine, then you can just take your regular old hand pruners and go in, you know, and just do some clipping around like this to get rid of these dead branches. And then it makes it nice and easy. This will also take a general shearing, like the regular hedge shears, at any time.
Yeah.
Once the leaves are on, if you got a spot, you know, you want to, you know, clip it off the house or something, you can just go ahead and do that. So this is a, you know, like an anytime kind of plant. It's almost like privet in the sense that it can be sheared at any time.
Yeah.
But once you get into August or so, you don't want to do any more cutting on it because if you trim later than that, then you're going to end up losing your color in the fall. You know, you don't want to stress the plant because that's going to keep it from coloring the way you want it to, anything like that. So early in the spring, right now, good time to do that. Or as a maintenance pruning later on when you're just clipping leaves off and stuff, up until August or so. It'd be a good time to let it go then.
Yeah, just look at your landscape or the location where it is. I mean, it should all fit in, you know. I think that's the whole trick to this, to just stand back and look at it, don't you think, Gary?
Yeah, you know, a lot of times, you know, that, you know, well, if you've planned ahead and you've put the bush where you want it and, you know, need to begin with.
Well, sometimes we don't.
Yeah. Now this particular plant, you know, this is a great plant to have off the corner. And when you got it off the corner of the house like this, see, we've got windows here. And then the birds land in here, and then you can see this.
Yes.
That's one of the things about this particular plant is, you know, being a close native to Iowa too, it's great for wildlife. It has the kind of branches that can fly in there and land on. So, you know, good for that kind of situation. So we can go over and we can take a look at our witch hazels, and we
Yes,
can also
great.
look at the Hicks yews over here. And
Yeah. What do we have here?
Yeah, this is a Vernal witch hazel.
Okay.
Witch hazel, Hamillus family. That's you know, they make medicinal, you know, products out of it and stuff.
Yeah.
But,
Very
great
old.
landscape plant.
Oh, and a very old plant.
Yeah, yeah.
It's been around for centuries.
This is classified as a grandma type plant,
Right,
you know, because
right.
they've been around forever. You know, it's blooming right now. It's unfortunately you don't have your nose right here because there's this very nice sweet clove scent that's coming off of this plant. This is one of the first things to bloom in Iowa. You know, people say, well, you know, I want to extend my bloom season. Well, this is one of the plants that plant families that we go to right away because they're the regular Virginiana type of witch hazel blooms very late in the fall, and this blooms very early in the spring. So you can extend your bloom season.
Mm-hmm.
And although the fragrance doesn't move away from this like a lilac, it still has a great fragrance, and the flowers themselves are very pretty. Kind of reminds you of a wild ginger bloom.
Yes, yes.
You know,
yes.
This is a plant that, you know, as you can see, this is going to be in our springtime category. This is going to be done blooming here in a couple weeks, and then that's the time to prune on it. And this is a colonizing type of plant. So, you know, right down here at the base, you can see that there's big old branches, and then there's also some of these smaller new branches. And we're letting some of those new ones grow up, and then we've taken off the rest of them. You know, part of the reason for that is because of its location, but basically we want something to rejuvenate and to continue to bloom. You'll notice that not any one of the branches on this is very big, and it has flowers all up and down the stem. So that's the best situation. You've got blooms all over the plant, and there's nothing too big and woody. And we trim this up a little bit because we have hostas underneath here, and then, you know, you got to be able to see the hostas.
That's right.
So, you know.
That's right. I love this plant. First of all, because it's an old-fashioned plant, and it does really well in Iowa, doesn't it?
You know, there really isn't much that it bothers it.
Right.
You know, they're stalwarts, and you know that if you need a smaller plant, this Vernal's good. If you want a bigger one, then the regular common one is great. There's a common one right over here that's quite a bit bigger. So now we'll go over here, and I want to show you a Hicks yew that's over in the corner of this. This is probably a little bit bigger than the normal Hicks yew that you see around town, but it is that same category of plant. You know, if you're in England and you have a castle, you know, they might be huge.
Absolutely.
But, around here, this planted as a foundation plant. This was moved in here off of, you know, a job site that we had at some distance, you know, probably about 10 years ago now, and we just let it go. You know, we just let this grow here because we wanted some big bulk evergreen on here. So, but the best thing for this is to, you know, I guess this class of plants being a yew, you know, they can be pretty much pruned anytime, but just like every other plants, there are better times to prune them. And again, one of those times is before it starts growing in the spring, or right after it puts its flush of growth on in the spring. So, you know, now, or let's say the end of June is a good time to do this. And now this, you know, got broken down a little bit from, you know, the kind of weather we had here. We had some ice and stuff on it, but, you know, you'll notice how this grows. You know, there's like some bare stem, and then there's a clump, and there's a bare stem and a clump. Well, that gives you a clue about the best way to prune this, which is, you know, you go down and you take, you know, off the bare spot, come down here where there's actually a clump, and then when you make that cut there, it's going to hide that pruning cut on it. Now, you know, for instance, you know, we're viewing this plant from this direction all the time. If I come in here and I take my clippers and I angle that cut so that, you know, the high side is on this side, then there's no way I'm going to be able to see that cut.
Perfect.
And all this growth, you know, hides that anyhow. So,
so
it's going to be almost impossible to see that in there.
We have lost so many in Fairfield. That awful storm last year. Oh, it just made me sick. It made me really sick. We were just snapping.
Yeah, you know, that was an amazing day actually to hear. You could just sit and listen to the plants go down. But yeah, you know, a lot of people are just noticing some of the damage that occurred from that. I was in a yard the other day, and there was just you know, that twisting of the branch. It finally killed it.
Yeah.
And then we had that big wind the other day, and it you know,
And that does it. Yeah, it does.
Some of those things take a while before you can actually figure out what's going on. But basically, what I'm going to do with this plant, you know, later on here is we're going to take and we're going to get some soft cord, and we're just going to pull it up.
Yeah.
And we leave that on there for a couple of months, then the plant will, you know, get that memory again of being up, and then we'll be able to just cut it right back off, and it'll stay up.
Yeah.
Another plant that's useful for that kind of thing is Arbor Vita. You know, the Arbor Vitas around town, the upright types, you'll see that, you know, if you get a really weird heavy snow, you know, they just go and they lay on the ground. So.
Yeah, I run out and I shake mine. Next morning, I'm out.
If they need some help getting back up, you can tie some soft cord around them and leave it for a couple months, and then they'll get back to that shape. So. Okay, so that's it for our hicks.
Is that bittersweet?
Yeah, this is actually the plant that's directly behind the fence here. This is a viburnum called Wentworth.
Oh, it's not bittersweet.
No. But it has the berries on there that cedar waxwings and a lot of other, you know, birds like.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
And they happen to be good dust control. You know,
good. Well, you need that.
Here,
so,
sure. You know, it's a combination of things that, you know, the plants in the viburnum family are tough. You know, they're durable and they do produce these berries. And we're kind of fortunate that there was a few that hung on there. Yeah. Usually they're slicked off by now, but again, we had an open winter, so there was more food around, so it's not as likely they got eaten this year.
Yeah, I noticed that too, that some of the berries are still left in my garden. Yeah. Usually the robins just pick them, you know, but not this year. They have been eating well during the winter time. Well, Gary, I think, unless you can show us something else, and I know there is tons of things to discuss out here. I mean, every corner one turns, there is something else, and we love to come back again and do something else. It's been a pleasure again to visit your place, and it was very interesting for me because people have a lot of questions about pruning, and I hope we could answer some of those questions. Again, Gary, tell us where you're located. That's always the question. Give us simple directions how you can get out to your business.
The easiest way to figure out where we're at is this, if you've ever been to the recycling center at Stevers.
Yes.
It's on Libertyville Road. You just go, when you turn in to go to Stevers, you're turning onto Kale Boulevard. Mm-hmm. There's a big billboard there that says the landscaper 2 miles. You come straight down that road. And
just follow the little country road. Don't drive fast.
You know, we're very close to Jefferson County Park, so you can stop over there and see the wildflowers and, you know, have a good time.
Well, thank you again, and happy spring and planting to you.
It's going to be a great one.
Yes. Thank you.